I want to welcome everyone back to the channel. I do appreciate for those people that viewed the previous videos and subscribed and liked and left a comment. My next guest doesn't really need an introduction yet. I'm going to go ahead and let her introduce herself.
Thank you, Sal. I think this is a great idea, and I'm really honored to be invited to participate in this documenting of different tribal leaders. So my name is Charlie Toledo. I'm indigenous Native American to New Mexico, a descendant of the Towa people, a descendant because my grandparents were taken from their families of origin and raised by, the Spanish invaders. So we were forcefully assimilated. In 1972, when I came to Napa Valley, I was making the choice early in life, probably around 16 or 17. Of course, we were in Catholic schools, like a lot of Native people. We had to be Christianized in order to survive, and that would happen to especially my parents. But that was around the time I didn't really like the Catholic Church and what they were telling us, and I wanted to go back, which I didn't realize was an indigenous perspective, back to nature. I felt like when I went to the ocean, and I was out in nature, I felt closer to Creator, and I didn't want to pray in a church where they were telling us to kneel down and all that. So when I moved to Napa Valley in 1972, after traveling around the world, kind of figuring out where I was going to go be and live my life and how, I found a lot of artifacts around the valley. I was around 22 at that time. And I started asking the local people, where did the Indians go? Because in New Mexico, where I spent my early childhood, um, the Native people were present. The Pueblos are there. They are out selling their wares, their art, their pottery, their jewelry. The Santa Fe art, Native American art, whatever it is. It's a big festival. It's a week-long festival in Santa Fe. It's one of the biggest art shows in the world to this day. And back when my early childhood, it was a big deal, and all the Native Americans from around the Southwest, near New Mexico and Arizona, would come and be selling their stuff. So I was used to the Indians being very visible. We knew where the Pueblos were. We'd go visit, get bread or whatever. And so when I came to California, we were told all the Native people moved north or they're gone. And when we started finding grinding bowls and little, beads and stuff, I would ask, where are the tribes? Where are the Indians? And I was told they moved north. So that became a personal quest of mine, just to keep asking the question. In 1986, so a little over 12 years, I did start connecting with the California tribes. But previous to that, my early childhood, we did a voluntary migration. My family moved from Albuquerque, New Mexico, 8 siblings. We moved out of the adobe house my father had built with his brothers, which was the norm. They would grow up, and initially my mother and dad lived with his parents, his father, and then they built their own house. All the brothers would get together and built a adobe house that we lived in, and were born in Albuquerque. But my father always had the dream to go to the ocean. He just always wanted to be at the ocean. And so when he went in World War II, he joined the Coast Guard and was stationed in Long Beach. So he promised my mother that they would move to California, and they had their honeymoon in Long Beach. And so when I was 8 years old, 1958, my family did a voluntary migration to Southern California, where I grew up until I was about 20. And I was getting disenfranchised with the capitalism and materialism of the world. And Vietnam War, I was a draft counselor. I started doing that when I was about 16 or 17 in high school. 1968, that was mandatory draft. So every peer, my brothers, all the male friends I had, at their 18th birthday, they had to sign up for the draft or the military, or they would be drafted. And then if they were drafted, they were immediately, within about 7 months, being sent to Vietnam. So I understood that, and as a 18-year-old, a senior in high school, we were being taught, about what was the purpose of Vietnam War, to preserve oil contacts and stuff like that. And I thought, wait a minute, the military industrial complex I learned about when I was 17. And so I decided at that point I would never be part of that system that resulted in the war and the mass killing of strangers across the world. So I started taking draft counseling classes, studying with the draft lawyer in high school. Of course, that wasn't that popular at that time, 1968, in a Catholic school. It was all macho. My brother did go into the Vietnam War. He unfortunately got drafted, but that's a long story. And then I was protesting in the streets and coming to San Francisco, leaving Orange County, and San Francisco was offering sanctuary to draft dodgers, which was a criminal offense, a felony offense that men would get arrested for if they avoided the draft. And so San Francisco said all the draft dodgers could come to San Francisco. So my boyfriend at that time was not wanting to participate in that, and I supported him in that. And we were studying how to legitimately avoid it, called monkey wrenching, doing small things to kind of aggravate the system to stop voluntary participating in the mass murder of strangers. And my brother would always say to me, he did sign up for Vietnam in 1970. He did 3 tours. He kept volunteering. He got addicted to the whole adrenaline of war. He was a corpsman, so he was on the ground. He was exposed to Agent Orange and all the different things, horrific things that were happening there during that war. And we had an ongoing discussion, a friendly one, because he was a very loving brother. We had a close relationship. He would say, I'm over here fighting so you can be in the streets protesting. And I would say, I'm over here protesting so you can be out of that war and you won't have to do that. And that was a discussion, a lifelong discussion. When he died about 10 years ago from secondary exposure to Agent Orange, it was a very horrific and horrible death. The Veterans Administration of the United States government was not supporting him. He had to struggle and fight to get health care for diseases that he had due to direct exposure to Agent Orange. At the end of his life, he sent me a letter. We often communicated by mail. He said, you know, I was wrong and you were right. The war was the wrong thing to be doing. And stay strong and keep doing what you're doing. We should never have been in that war. We shouldn't be in war. It's harmful and there's no good that comes from it. You were right. And so, you know, that's a sad and hard thing to hear. And we were adults at that point. I've had 2 children. But it certainly strengthened my resolve. Of course, that was a crime to be supporting draft dodgers. And we were setting up safe houses. That brought me to San Francisco because of the sanctuary house and also because of my boyfriend and other young males that I was friends with that were wanting to avoid the draft. We were coming to San Francisco and some friends had a house on the Fillmore that was a big safe house. So we were there and the FBI would come knocking on our door with, you know, search warrants and arrest warrants for people from Orange County that were seeking shelter there. And we did that. We resisted and monkey wrenched against that war until the draft was ended and the Vietnam War was ended. At that point, they used to say, love it or leave it. So when that all got resolved, I bought a one-way ticket to Western Europe on my 21st birthday and traveled around Western Europe and the Middle East for about 18 months and was over there then counseling draft dodgers because a lot of other young men around the world from the countries that had forced draft, Germany, South Africa, Israel, the United States, there were a lot of young males traveling, trying to find where in the world they could live and not be forced to kill other people. As we say, kill strangers. So I was doing a lot of draft counseling during that time, my young adulthood. And then at one point I knew that it would be time for me to come back to be at the place where all this harm had started. So I returned to the United States after, like I said, 16 to 18 months. And when I relocated myself to San Francisco, I think I was there less than a week and the FBI was at my front door with a search warrant that had my name on it, which in the early days, it was these other young men had their names. And it was a different experience, you know. I was 22 years old. I had the backpack that I've been traveling out of for 18 months and I just had a permanent address, my first permanent address in 3 years. And to see a search warrant with my name typed on it, I let the FBI agents come in. I did not give them permission to search the house, but I allowed them to question me and I teased them in a way I won't share because that's a wild thing. But then when they left, I just packed up my backpack and left right behind them and just hitchhiked up to Yountville where I had a boyfriend, Napa County. And I told my roommate at that time I'm leaving. And she said, who was that at the door? And she says, where are you going to go? And I said, well, it's better if you don't know. And I think that's a Hollywood statement, but I was the first one to say it. This was 1972. I said, hey, it's better if you don't know where I am. I said, if somebody comes asking for me, they're not my friends. Don't tell anybody. Pretend you don't know me. I said, my friends will know where I am. And I did then at that point, 1972, come to Napa Valley. That's how I came to be here. and realized that this was the core. You know, it's where some of the wealthiest people in the world live. The old money in Napa Valley is from the Crusades, the pillaging and plunging of, you know, foreign country to amass wealth. And so I knew that this was the place to be, to address the issues of war as a form of communication. I continued my life, a lifelong commitment to pacifism, to, you know, mediation, to resolve conflict through mediation and discussion and education. I went on to want to have my babies at home, because I always had that question: what makes our society so violent? Why is the United States government so violent? And one of the theories back at that time, which is still a theory, that the reason the United States is so violent as a country is because of the difficult and violent birth habits, obstetrical breeding. At that time, women were drugged, they were tied to their table to deliver babies, and then the babies were taken out, held upside down, spanked on the bottom to get them to wake up from the drugs they'd given the mother, and then separated from the mother 2 to 3 days. And so when I was having my children, 1976 and 1978, those were still the obstetrical practices in California. But I made the decision to have a home birth, which was illegal at the time. I was committing a crime called child endangerment. After I had my own children at home, I continued to assist other women and families to have their babies at home. I did that for about, I think, 3 years. In 1986, it became legal option to have home births in California. So then it's a tough way to make a living. And like I said, we would have been accused of premeditated murder if we had lost a baby. Assisting women was 3 felony offenses: practicing medicine without a license, maternal endangerment, and child endangerment. So if we would have lost a mother or a baby at any of those home births, over 100 births I helped assisted at, we would have been first-degree murder. So that was a big risk. I had 2 young children. When midwifery and home birth became legal in California, I decided to go into being a masseuse and a hypnotherapist, which was my professional life, learning how to mediate conflict. I went on from there to start addressing issues of human rights. We call it now, it's called human rights and social justice. As a professional mediator, working with families, going into businesses to help them mediate with hypnotherapy and then body awareness. I started participating through the UN international conferences in 1995. I went to the 4th annual International Women's Conference and got involved with Indigenous human rights globally, and was able to sign on to a request to get Indigenous people of the world to have representation at the UN, which they had tried to get since 1936, when the United Nations started as the League of Nations in New York City. There was over 1,000 Indigenous people who signed that petition. From every continent in the world was represented. It was submitted in 1995. In the year 2000, it was approved. So 2000 was the first year that the United Nations acknowledged that Indigenous people of the world should have their human rights protected. Before that, there was no avenue for that to occur. It became 2 permanent committees. So Indigenous people have those 2 venues to apply or complain about human rights. So in 1992, I was again looking at the tribes. I had found where the tribes were. In 1986, I met Norma Knight, a California Pomo woman who has raised her children and family here in Napa Valley. And I'd gone to Big Mountain, again, asking myself the question, where does war start? And what was happening in 1986 at the Big Mountain Dene Reservation in northern Arizona was the U.S. government was moving in to relocate the tribes because they wanted the uranium resources there. So the tribe was opening up and asking the people of the world to come and be in solidarity with them, so they wouldn't be killed, is what they were anticipating. 1986. So I went there with some friends of mine from San Francisco, hippie friends from the draft dodging days. They went out there for a day and weren't prepared and left right away. But I went and I was prepared to be in a wilderness desert environment like I had been raised in my childhood. We had tents. I had my two kids, they were 3 and 5. And that's where I met Norman Knight out in the middle of Big Mountain. Is very, very remote. It's like going to a different planet because any of you have ever been to the desert, and especially the northern desert of New Mexico or Arizona, is pretty harsh. And but I had a tent, I had all the food, I had everything, right clothes, all that stuff. So we stayed, and then I met Norma, and I realized that I was trying to set up my tent, and like I said, my daughter were 3 and 5 at the time. I had driven from Napa there by myself to meet my friends. And they weren't there yet. So I went into a little room and everybody was talking Navajo, and I was like, oh my God, I wasn't prepared. The snow was coming. My 3-year-old had a high fever spiking. We're out in the middle of a remote northern desert. And I thought I was not prepared for a language barrier. And so that was a severe culture shock. But I stayed in there for a while, and you have to let the elders finish speaking. And one elder was talking, and just like Sal knows me, I will talk and talk. And I thought, holy crap, I got to get a tent set up. It's starting to snow. My kids were stuffed in an old VW bug. So I went out and kind of a partial arbor, like what's behind me, and I didn't know what that was, but there was this little fire and this little woman all wrapped up with her scarf and her coat, huddled by the fire. There was no barriers. I thought, wow, they just finished the house, left it half built. There was one little wooden plywood to block the wind. And I sat by her and I said, excuse me, do you speak English? And she's there huddled up with her scarf all tight around her neck, like we used to do in our early childhood, and her coat all bundled because it was really cold, starting to snow. And she said, well, I have my bachelor's degree. I think I can manage the language. So we both started laughing, and that was the beginning of a lifelong friendship. She's a California Pomo, like I said, from the Round Valley Indian Reservation, but she was currently living at that time in Napa. And she said, where do you come from? And I said, Napa. And she said, oh, good. I needed a ride home. And I was still getting there. It was just starting to snow, I'm going through severe culture shock, language barrier, whatever else was going on with me. And I said, wow, you came all the way down here without a ride home? And she goes, oh, I knew somebody would come. See, I met you. I just got here. You be my ride home. I said, oh, my car's full. She goes, that's okay. And so I went and found a place to set up my tent and get my kids all set up in the tent where it was warm and cozy and all that. And then I did bring her home. We stayed out there for a week. Their strategy did work. All the people of the world that gathered there for Big Mountain Survival Camp, the Army did not come in or kill anybody. They didn't even come out there. And that was a successful holding of the tribal land, to get global attention to what was the United States government was still doing to Native Americans in the 1986. But Norman Knight's the one who opened the window or the door to the California tribes in Northern California. And the Pomo tribes, I started going up to Round Valley. And then Jenny Marufo was her cousin, who was a medicine woman from Kashaya, who was one of the last full-blooded 100% Wapo people, native to Napa Valley. And she was at that time, again, 1986, 1989, gathering people from around California, people that were awake. And she was bringing us together in gatherings at all the remote rancherias and reservations around the state of California. About every 2 months, she would have a gathering. We'd all go, and we'd be in ceremony and prayer. She was saying it's time to wake up. The bad things that happened are over. It's time for us to stand up and be responsible for our communities and bring us collectively into the present time after the trauma. So I was asking, as an assimilated, urbanized Indian, out-of-state Indian, all those terms that are given to us, I was asking the tribes and the tribal people, medicine people that I was gathering with, and there was a lot of, all the leaders really of California were there at those gatherings back in the late 80s. And I was asking, what can we as assimilated, urbanized people do to help the people? Because the situations in the rancherias especially were pretty desperate and marginalized. And what collectively came out of about 3 or 4 years of discussions, being in these road trips and these gatherings throughout the state, that what was needed was a safe place for Native American people of California, especially, to gather and to be in ceremony, because then it was still very dangerous to do that. We had to hide to do that. So I had the vision, just to go ahead, let's do that here in Napa. Because Napa, I found out much later, is the longest continuously inhabited place in North America. So the place that I had come to after my, traveling around thinking where was I going to live to be a peacemaker, that it really is Napa Valley. And the purchasing of land in 1998, initially I thought, because I'm an optimist, that we would find somebody to donate land to us. This was 1998, so it was a long time ago, and things have changed a lot in the last 25 years. But then people were still very hostile to Indian people. And one of my mentors, Ron Lincoln from Round Valley, he had told me when he knew we were going to purchase land and found out nobody's giving us land. That's what the chair, Lanny James, had said. Charlie, nobody's giving us land. He was a Vietnam vet, as a POW, and he was the first Cherokee out-of-state Indian that was the chairman of Suscol. And he was the one who had the idea. He said to me, one of our meetings with somebody, he said, they killed us and they ran us off. Nobody's giving us land back. If we want land, we're going to have to buy it. So it was his idea. He had the veterans bill. So he thought, you and me together, how much rent are you paying? This, how much rent I'm paying. We could use the veterans bill to put a down payment and buy land. He gave us the idea and then he left the state, but I was still moving forward on the idea. We didn't have the veterans bill to help us with a down payment, but we did move forward. In 1998, we located the 20 acres that's pictured behind me. And we started to use it, develop it as a ceremonial gathering place. Initially dedicated the unity of all tribes. But as we started working, we thought, well, tribes is too limiting. We should be unity of all people. But as we lived out there, we started having the lizard people and the deer people, the four-leggeds, the winged ones, the dragonflies, hummingbirds. We thought, well, let's dedicate this to unity of all life. So the spiritual arbor that's behind me is dedicated to the unity of all life. We purchased the land in 98. We paid it off 4 years later. And we've been gradually moving towards developing what we call Suskol House. Suscol, the council is named after, was the one band that was at the southern part of Napa in 1972, when Suscol Indian Council was founded to address the issues of Native American graves and remains. At that point, the state of California didn't have anything, and they were digging up the village. And Jim Big Bear King, who was another one of my mentors, I had the good fortune of having very, very strong, powerful mentors. He was a local Crow. He was here during the relocations of the tribes out of and around California. He was a 7-year-old child. So he had oral tradition of the Euro invasions of the late 1800s in this region. He was also a main supporter of Alcatraz takeover in 1972. So he formed the Suscol Inter-tribal Council. It was Indian Council, it was called back then, to address the issues of what to do at the state level. Governor Brown, in his first incarnation, they used to call him Governor Moonbeam back then because he was so groovy, that he stopped the construction of this main southern crossing bridge, that the Suscol village was all being dug out and all these human remains were being exposed. Jim Big Bear stood out there and he stood in front of a tractor and he said, if you're going to keep digging up my people, you're going to have to shoot me. And under Kapler's Indian law, which he knew about, and again, because of the takeover of Alcatraz, a lot of the Native Americans were finding that that was a loophole for landless tribes of California, that they could reclaim any unused federal land. So that was Alcatraz, and that was happening then, and that was activating a lot of Indians, and actually all the leaders of the next couple of decades were on Alcatraz, and part of that Alcatraz takeover. They were students at San Francisco State and UC Berkeley. And that was the same time Suscol Indian Council was founded to address the issues they set up. It was the first time the tribes of California were brought together, Governor Brown's office, to talk about what and how to handle the grave remains and village remains in the state of California. So the Native American Heritage Commission was founded about 1975 based on that early work of Suscol Indian Council. It became a state model that is still used today. The Native American Heritage Commission addresses the issues of graves and funeral remains and village sites and how to proceed. They have most likely descendants. About 6 or 7 years later, that became a model for the national NAGPRA, most Native people know, Native American Graves Reparation Act. that is how to address the issue of human remains, Native American human remains and village sites, artifacts out on the national level. So that was Suscol Indian Council. So we're still here, you know, in 2023, we've developed a ceremonial arbor. The land was paid off in 4 years. We were committed, like Jim Big Bear King and Norman Knight, my predecessors, that they were focused on education. And I've always said that racism, systemic racism, social injustice is based on ignorance. And so the cure for that would be education. So we've always been committed to educating the public, to educating schools, to working towards developing curriculum that is accurate to what happened, the genocides of California. Sal and I working together through Suscol, we got a mental health grant about 6 years ago. It was a pilot project for the state of California. I was approached by the mental health director at that time. It was an innovations program, it was called, to produce programs that were helping or serving underserved or unserved populations, which Native Americans are still listed as that in California. So the director, I was working with mental health services to get funding to do education and address the issues of mental health and substance abuse within the Native communities in Napa County and in California. So I said, well, the most important thing that I thought we could do was tell the truth and find out and present the truth to what happened. So our theory was, is this reality of the harsh genocides that occurred, the military invasions, is that too difficult or too traumatic to introduce to the general public? So the format was to present it through mental health specialists, trauma specialists, create a small trial curriculum. It was 5 workshops to talk about that, the genocides of California, to introduce words into the vocabulary like the California genocides, European invasions, you know, that this area was fully occupied for tens of thousands of years. It was not discovered. It was not civilized. It was dehumanized. One of the things we say in our cohort presentations is that this was a fully civilized permanent villages. California was fully occupied. It was not a discovery, it was a military invasion, and we present it like a crime scene that it was. Who, what, where, when, and how. We have maps, we have dates, we have timelines, we have who did it, who was doing it. That's all documented. So we created this about 5 years ago. We're still in the midst of doing that. We're organizing right now our 15th cohort. And we're starting to, it was a pilot project for the state of California. We did all kinds of analysis, again, through the county, Napa County Prevention or Early Intervention Program. And then with the Innovations Dollar, it was a 3-year program. It was initially designed to be 18 months, but the other program partners needed more time. So that gave us more time. We had the intention to have 3 cohorts. We were able to have 4, and then do really deep analysis. They were mental health providers, mostly trauma specialists and therapists that had to live or work in Napa County. And the questions we asked is this, how does this affect your professional life? Did this have effect on your personal life? And is this information too traumatic to present to the general public? And pretty much unanimous, the people that participated in all those surveys, they thought it was not too traumatic to present to the general public, that it did impact their professional and personal lives. It changed their attitude. They felt like it gave them, especially Indigenous people that took the first couple of cohorts that were so heavily surveyed, they felt like they knew where their feet were standing on the ground. Is really important for people that are living in the community to know what occurred. And like I always say, in blessing the ancestors of the first people, of the Onisati, the Post-Miwok, the Homo, Ohlone, Maidu, Wailaki, Numlaki. We say the names. We would do that in the early days, especially I was taught that from Jim Big Bear in 1992, 93. I was working with him, like I said, for 15 years before he passed away. But in the early days, anytime I was asked to speak, I would just bring him and he would talk, and I might do the introduction, then he would talk. So it was his oral tradition and his demeanor that really mentored me and gave me a baseline of information, especially again working with Norman Knight, who was California Pomo, and then working in an urbanized manner to earn a living for her family. Jenny Marufo, also over in Sonoma County, she lived in Santa Rosa, but intermarried to Pomos at Kashaya Pomo on the coast of Sonoma. So those were my mentors that I had the good fortune to be around, Jenny for over 3 years before she passed. But she was the one who was collectively bringing us together, all these mostly educated Native Americans in gatherings, but we were going to remote rancherias and helping them to move towards healing. How can we help them recover from these horrific genocides and isolation and marginalization? And I think, like I said, all the different people I met through those gatherings all emerged as leaders, mental health and social health, and created a lot of the programs that are happening now. It's a whole statewide endeavor by all of the tribes, so many people, that is kind of put us at the Renaissance period where we can say in all kinds of money, federal money, state monies going to the tribes to recover, to establish economic sovereignty, visibility. I say the words emerging from invisibility, that not only were the people nearly wiped out, but the memory of the people, the names of the people. So that's why I learned from Jig Big Bear always to say the names of the tribes and the territories that we're in. And so when I was working at state and international conferences or given the opportunity to speak, I would always say that, what are the names of the tribes, whether we were in East Africa or Afghanistan, wherever we were. I was always trying to ask Indigenous people about, what were their stories of origin, what were their traditional medicines. Those are things I've always been curious about. So that's me in a little wrap. I've gone over 20 minutes.
Thank you for sharing. I have a couple of questions for you. Maybe you'd like to answer. So one of the question is, can you explain to the viewers, or not explain to the viewers, but let people know about the project for the Suskol House that's going on out there, what the project's like, what the intention of the building is, and just kind of, some information, just elaborate and share a little bit about that.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. So Suscol House was created as a safe place for Native Americans to gather. And what we realized, for us, especially when we were younger, that just to be out on raw land was kind of rough. We said we had to prepare space for elders and children, not realizing we would be the elders by the time we're getting it done. So we have the ceremonial arbor, we have some small camping lodges, and then we've been designing, we got it permitted. So it's been a long process gathering the money and the permitting, kind of a guest house, a retreat house. And really what we found in the innovations presentations, that the healers, the therapists, and the medicine people, and especially working within the Native community, but in all of the communities, there's this gap where the people that are doing the healing and providing services for, substance recovery and all of those things, that they don't have respite. So the intention was that people would come out, in small groups, small family groups, to get respite, to get re-energized through the earth, through ceremony with fire, sweat lodges, and then just the oral traditions, the spoken word, a place where the elders could be communicating in safe, comfortable environments to share information, to pass down wisdom. Of course, what youth gives to elders is inspiration. They get different perspectives, especially now they're 4 generations removed from the trauma of the genocides. So they're coming much more energetic than we've seen the young people now. So that's Suskol House. We're at the end phase of construction. We need more funds and donations. And most of the work we've done, people always have this illusion that somehow things were given to us or to me personally, and nothing was really given. We worked for it, we applied for it. A lot of the money, we would have grants or contracts, and then once the deliverables were serviced, the money could be unrestricted money. So then we would use that unrestricted money or donations and contracts towards exactly, but mostly it's been donations from individual people. When we were buying the land, we got 2 big grants to pay for 50%. The other 50% was paid by individual donors, people donating $10, $25, $50. A lot of people made a commitment in the last 2 years of the purchase, because we paid off the land in 4 years. And it was, could you make a commitment, a monthly commitment till the land's paid off? And we were able to do that in 4 years because people paid off. We paid off 50% of the land by individual donors donating. Mostly it was $25 a month. We paid the land off. And so the construction now is the same thing. There's been a lot of donations from individual people. A lot of it has been contracts, some of it the contract specifically to, getting to building out the lodges, and then the prevention, early intervention, we were doing it. If we did kids camp and stuff, we could use some of that. money to upgrade the, have an outdoor kitchen and running water and stuff. We had a gravity flow. But so that's the intention of Suskol House. We're really nearing the end, and we're asking people to be monthly donors. And it's many hands, many hearts. The reason and the way we've created the SLAM project is a lot of people donating, volunteering there to help out, donating monthly, either one-time donation or monthly donations. Initially, we had a campaign, and we thought if 1,000 people donated $1,000, that would give us the money to finish construction. And because of all the natural disasters we've had, the fires and the earthquakes and the everything, COVID, that's been more delayed than we thought. But we're really now at the end phase, and we're needing about 400 people to donate $1,000, or just for people, a lot of people to make a, say, $25, $50 donation once a month until construction's completed. And then we'll have our respite house where people can come to, get renewed, and their families or their culture, again, doing mediations if that's needed within troubled families, or providing mostly a place to do the oral traditions, share the stories. And then I think, were you going to ask me that last question?
And there's two more real quick.
Okay.
If you want to go ahead and just, I would say question, just go ahead and plug. How can people get a hold of you? Maybe you got a Facebook page, a website, someplace where you could be contacted with, as far as maybe people want to do collaborations, donate money. How can they get in touch with you?
And we're collaborating with a lot of people and organizations, and that's suscolcouncil.org. SUSCOL suscolcouncil.org. Or if you Google Suscol Council, we pop up. And through our website, there's a physical address that you can mail a donation. You can donate online, or you can send in a little request, say you want to volunteer. We're doing workforce training. That's what we're doing right now. That's really exciting. We're involved in this summer as developing a Native American Heritage Garden, which is a pilot project for the United States government, the USDA. It's always so funny when we get federal funds. A lot of the world travel I did was funded through the Department of Interior, which is really funny to me given my early adulthood, that we're getting money from the US government to do the money. I was, those same people that were chasing after us. Anyway, so you can volunteer. We're developing the Native American Cultural Garden. We have permission from the United States government to grow hemp, to grow tobacco, and then we're just other indigenous plants that are already growing on the property. We're right now just developing that. So we do need help. We need hands on the ground, to come and move rocks, help plant plants. And we're going to plan to do that this season right now. Hopefully it'll be done by the fall time. And then the P.O. Box, all that information is on our website, Suscol Council, and also a link to our YouTube channel you can subscribe to, contact information. Our website has talks about the history of Suscol in a pictorial way. And then our phone number is 707-256-3561. And I will be answering that phone sooner or later if you call. If you want to donate, have a land tour, or volunteer, those are all things we need. A monetary, physical donation. Again, we say many hands, many hearts. It really is a gift of love from so many generations. Some of Norman Knight's grandchildren and great-grandchildren are still part of Suscol Council. Jim Big Bear King, some of his grandchildren and great-grandchildren are periphery part. They got more urbanized, but they're still around. Jenny Marufo's children and grandchildren have stayed involved as part of the organization. We still work really closely with those families of my mentors. We've kept those contacts.
Thank you, Charlie. Last question was, there's one of two. You could pick one. When they say Charlie Toledo, what would you want to be remembered for? Or is there any words of encouragement for the future?
And I think that's a great question, Sal. I told you that earlier, but I think it's really good to have people reflect on that. And what comes to mind right in this moment is that she was a wild and bold woman. I was fearless. I am fearless. I took chances. Life-threatening. My children were threatened. I think be wild and fearless. Be bold. People have their vision. A lot of times you go on a vision quest, you have this vision, and then most people lose hope because it's this giant picture, And I've always said locally and globally that, the biggest picture, the biggest dream can be reached, if you remember that you have to stand where you are right in the present, and it's a small series of small steps until you reach the goal. And so many people, they lose hope because they want the big picture to be here right now. And so just taking those small steps and staying focused. I was asked recently in a high school class, have you ever met an obstacle that stopped you? And my response was no. The federal government went into war zones in East Africa and went to Korea and places like that, and just small steps, develop the language, and take small steps towards your intention, and stay focused. But I think the work of Suscol Council is a legacy. In the early days with my mentors with the Suscol Indian Council, they created a state model, starting from the county state model that became replicated nationally, and Suscol has done the same thing. We've done that. We've had a couple now. Our innovations project is being used as a state model, a template for developing curriculum for the state of California with accurate perceptions, and they're going around the state, the governor's office with the first tribal liaison, gathering stories of what happened here in California from the words of the people, the victims of the genocide. So I think just that innovation and being bold and wild, and that Suskol House is a prototype. We didn't think that all of the public would come here, but just an inspiration for other people to replicate in their own communities. It is already being replicated. We had in some of our cohorts, people from Malaysia, people from other countries. They're interested in what we're doing and how we did it, and wanting to replicate it in places where active genocides are going on right now. Papua New Guinea, places like that down Central America. Those are allies. We're working with people in South America. So I think that's my inspiration for everybody. Be bold, be wild.
Again, thank you again, Charlie, for taking time out of your busy schedule and sit down and have a conversation with the people. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Like, subscribe. If you like, leave a comment. It's okay. The guests, I do appreciate them, and they would like to hear comments, feedback, and all that. So with that being said, I want to tell everyone, be safe and have a good day.